Howdy, partner. Welcome back. I'm John Stark from MacMovieGuy.com, and we're going to do a review, celebration of the anniversary of the 1994 film Wyatt Earp. I'm going to do this entire thing with this accent. I'm going to pull it off. I promise. So, in 1994, Lawrence Kasdan teamed up with Kevin Costner to direct the film Wyatt Earp. And I decided to watch it again to celebrate the 30th anniversary after having watched the Netflix docu-series that is narrated by Ed Harris that really jumped into the laughing times of Wyatt Earp and the cowboy war, as it were, of the day. So having seen a little bit more of a historical approach to Wyatt Earp, it was interesting to then dive into a 3-hour fictional account of Wyatt Earp and his brothers, the Earps, as well as some other standouts in the Western culture, including Doc Holliday, who is played by Dennis Quaid in this movie. This movie has a stacked cast, let me tell you. We've got Kevin Costner, we've got Dennis Quaid, we've got Gene Hackman, we've got Bill Pullman is in here, Mayor Winningham, we've got Jim Caviezel is in here as a young man, Taya Leone, Betty Buckley. I'm definitely going to forget names. We've got Lyndon Ashby, who you may not know unless you really love Mortal Kombat, because he was also Johnny Cage. We got Jeff Fahey. Jeff Fahey's in this. We got Mark Harmon. We've got, like I said, I'm definitely going to forget names. It has such a huge cast, it's almost impossible to remember all of them at the same time. And this is one of those just broad, sweeping epics. It's the kind of film that you could mistake as being the kind of thing that Kevin Costner himself would have liked to direct, and I'm sure he did. He was very involved in making sure this thing got off the ground. He really wanted to do a Wyatt Earp movie. There's a huge story about like the battle between this movie and Tombstone, because they were both kind of being created at the same time, and how he essentially maneuvered the chessboard, as it were, to basically block Tombstone from having access to a lot of basic things like costumes. Tombstone had to work really hard to find the right costumes for their production, because Wyatt Earp had already kind of taken up all the other costumes, and Tombstone was forced to have to push forward and get a certain release date. Like, they had to be out by a certain time so they could beat Wyatt Earp. It was a battle. Tombstone came out first, Wyatt Earp came out second. Depending on your personal taste will depend on which movie you prefer more. I think Wyatt Earp is a decent movie. I just don't think it's Kevin Costner's best movie, and I think a lot of that has to do with Lawrence Kasdan, who sort of at this point is in a transitional phase in his life. I'm gonna call that a transitional phase, because before this, the man started out with Body Heat. I don't know if we remember why first of all, you know Lawrence Kasdan a lot because he wrote a lot of things. So he's credited as a screenwriter on several things, not necessarily as a director, but he has directed several projects, including Body Heat and The Big Chill, which both kind of are 80s staples, as well as The Accidental Tourist. But when you look at the films he directed after Wyatt Earp, it's like French Kiss, Mumford, Dreamcatcher, and then he takes like a giant break and tries to come back in with Darling Companion, which didn't really go anywhere as a film. So I call this the transitional phase of Lawrence Kasdan forgetting everything that he learned about directing and then moving into the lesser phase. Unless you're a huge fan of French Kiss, I don't know, maybe, but I don't think anybody really remembers Mumford or knows what that is. I have seen it. I do know what it is. And Dreamcatcher was critically panned. I think only a few people really like that movie. But So Wyatt Earp, it's about the Wild West. That's why I'm doing this accent. I'm telling you. Actually, I'm not culturally appropriating the accent. I did grow up in the Ozarks, so this is not that far from where I grew up. Uh, and Kevin Costner gets to play Wyatt Earp. He gets to live out his cowboy dreams. There are two things Kevin Costner likes to love in life, and that is being a cowboy and baseball. I'm surprised he hasn't figured out a way yet to be a baseball cowboy in the same film. A baseball playing cowboy. Um, I'm sure Horizon Part 2 is going to feature a scene where a whole bunch of cowboys play baseball, and that'll be the day. But no, this is the story of him starting out as a young man, learning a lot from his father, played by Gene Hackman. Also, all the Earp brothers of his. He's got all the Earps riding along with him throughout life, and they come and go as it is. Morgan's there for most of it, and he loves and he loses, loves and lost along the way, but he is seen as being sort of like the moral compass in many situations, and he's brought into towns, and develops a reputation for himself, possibly for being a little bit of a hard ass, a little bit hard, a little bit too hard. Some people, he gets run out of one town just because maybe he arrests too many people. But at the same time, Law and Order, we gotta get in there with that Law and Order. So Kevin Costner gets in there and shakes things up. It's Wyatt Earp, and makes people leave their guns outside at the border. There's sort of like a fortuitous moment in his life where he falls in love with a woman, but he's also married at the time, but also that woman's kind of connected to somebody else, and that kind of starts the beginning of the end for Wyatt Earp and his the troubles that he starts having, where people start seeing him. And this is kind of what Wyatt Earp, the Cowboy War, went into a little bit, is the drama surrounding the Earps and the Clantons and everything that happened at the OK Corral, which is sort of where the movie kind of ends. It doesn't go too much into where the docuseries went this year, in terms of sort of the politics of it all behind, but it is an engaging Western. It's a sweeping Western. It's got a great score to it. The music in here is lovely. It's not necessarily inherently memorable, to where you feel like, oh my God, that is the score to Wyatt Earp. I've heard that before. But at the same time, it does have that feeling like it is supporting the beauty of the world beneath it, which I did get through audio description, blind film. I did watch this with audio description, because I didn't really remember Wyatt Earp from back in the day. I probably fell asleep in it, honestly, because in 1994, I was a kid, and this was 3 hours. So I think that's probably why I barely remember this thing, but I think I've seen it before. Some of it was like, oh, I remember this. Why do I remember this? I didn't think I had seen it before, but there were scenes in here I was like, wait a minute, why am I having deja vu? So I don't think it's definitely not Lawrence Kasdan's best work. It's definitely not Kevin Costner's best work. It does seem to kind of have what I would say is a little bit of I wouldn't have projected the Metacritic score that I saw it at. It's like a 45. Feels like that's a little low for this. Feels like there's a high production value that went into this. It is kind of funny to look at a little bit of the cast and realize some of the names that are showing up here and how they kind of didn't pan out. And a lot of people they're very, very sort of like 90s specific. Like their career just kind of petered out after the 90s, like Jeff Fahey and Joanna Going, and just a couple other people like that. They're just kind of like, this was their time, and it didn't really move much beyond that. And obviously people like Mark Harmon went on to do more things in television. So, but it's Gene Hackman in a Western. I mean, that's good, right? He's hot off of Unforgiven. So, I kind of wonder if this film would have been better or worse if Costner had directed it, because he would have been fresh off of Dances with Wolves, which was the film that got him his Oscar. So if he had directed Wyatt Earp, would that have been a better follow up for him than ultimately what ended up being the follow up to Dances with Wolves for him? An interesting thought. Um, but it's a long ass movie that you're gonna have to sit through. That's for certain. Lawrence Kasdan really has decided that you are going to know all you need to know about Wyatt Earp. But then again, a lot of westerns back, in the day were these big sweeping epics that were kind of long. I don't know that they were all 3 hours long. He probably could have backed that off by about 15 minutes and tightened up the runtime, if we're being real honest. But I think it's a pretty solid movie. I just don't think it's a classic. As far as whether or not it's holding up to the test of time, as I've been exploring in these anniversary releases of mine, I think kind of probably that question is a little bit more than I think people would assume, because it didn't necessarily light the box office on fire when it came out. So I think when you line it up and put, box office versus how many people have seen Wyatt Earp, versus how many people still talk about Wyatt Earp, versus how many people are fans of Wyatt Earp, I think that ratio is actually pretty good for where it started. I think it's held up fairly well. It's not one of the anchors of 1994, but it's also not one of the films from 1994 that time has forgotten. So it's one of those films, though, that I think as time progresses, and we're sitting here and we're talking about the 50th anniversary of Wyatt Earp, is anybody will people care then? 30 years is not an impossible amount of time to try to remember a movie. But as you get further and further out, when is Wyatt Earp going to fall off? Because I don't think it's going to be seen as one of the leading Westerns of all time. But certainly, there's reason to watch it. So if you are a fan of Wyatt Earp, I think you should get in there and get her done. Get her done. Anyway, this has been a fun review. Uh, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this one up, and I'm gonna give Wyatt Earp B+. How about that? How's that fix you? Anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing, as it were, and I will see y'all on the other side.